At NAB this year, I stopped by Redrockmicro's booth, and they were showing off a new product that they're coming out with called the Halo. And essentially what this is true autofocus the way you would want for video, which sounds crazy, but I saw it, it works. It's a little nuts, but essentially what they said was that it uses the same technology that's in modern cars. So, when a car is backing up or it's self-parking, it has sensors on there that can determine how far or how close another object is relative to the car. And so they've implemented a similar technology in a device that mounts underneath the camera, and it basically scans the scene for objects. And they had it set up where there were two models that entered the scene, and immediately on a little display panel they had there, two dots popped up. And he was able to focus between the two automatically, manually, however you wanted. There were some tracking features. So as one model stepped back and the other stepped forward, he could switch it to where it would focus on that first model and set tracking points, or essentially what he wanted to track in the scene. And the software would stay up to date real time. And it was really smooth, very accurate, and it all worked by using Redrockmicro's wireless focus controller that they already have. So the setup, once it's finally released, will probably be fairly expensive. He said he couldn't give a firm price point, but he expected it to be between $2,000 and $5,000. So that's a pretty big range. But he was basically saying they weren't sure what all they were going to include. So there's the Halo device that basically does the scanning and the analyzing of what's in the scene. But then you also need the motor mounts and the controller to actually do the focus adjustment on the lens. So I don't know if it's anything that I'll personally own ever, just because oftentimes I'm not in a situation where I would need something like that. But it's definitely really cool technology, especially because, autofocus for video, people have been playing around with it for the past couple of years, and no one seems to, be able to get a handle on it. Do you handle it in the camera as an external adapter of some kind? Like, what do you do? How do you handle it? And this setup looked very, very smart. And it looked like, once it was all said and done and all built out, once it had all the components, it was working really smooth. He didn't have an expected release date for this, but I would imagine it'll be out within a year or so. So I'm looking forward to seeing it finally coming out and maybe potentially playing with it myself. One thing I should add that was a limitation on the system was that the objects had to be on the same horizontal plane. So there's not actually true three-dimensional tracking, but it can track forward to back. So as something gets closer to the camera, focus pulls closer, and as it goes further away, it focuses away. But I asked about, what if you mounted the camera up, significantly higher or lower than your subjects? Because then rather than them just coming, forward and back, they're actually tracking up and down to a certain extent. And that was something that couldn't be handled by the Halo. But, that might not be the biggest problem in the world, because that's not the most common situation. Most of the times you're just worried about that horizontal plane of view rather than, a complicated elevated shot. So I don't know if that's something that's going to be added eventually. I'm sure they're constantly trying to get this technology pushed, pushing the boundaries of it. So we'll see how this all plays out over the next couple of years. It should be really interesting to see what companies enter this market and at what price point all these things come in at, because there are some high-end wireless focusing units, but now that we're adding this automation to the system, it should be pretty fun.